Hello and welcome back to Garry's Garage, and in this episode I want to finally get this radiator finished in the car and maybe get the car moving under its own power again. So Radiator Modifications 2.0 are well underway, and the final thing left to do is finish off this lower outlet. I've offered it up to the car already and roughly marked out where it needs to be chopped. So I will carry on and do that, and then I'm really hoping that I can get the radiator in, maybe get the charge cooler system all finished up, and see about getting the car outside so that I can fill the coolant system up and give it a good check over for leaks and get it all up to temperature. And I don't really want to gas myself out inside the garage. So let's see whether we can get that done today. So that is, I think, all of the modifications done to the radiator, and the only thing that's left now is to pressure test it again. So I'll do the first step as I did before, just here on the bench to see if there's anything obvious, and then we'll take it over to the big bucket of water and see if there's anything smaller. So that's just coming around this top bit here where the Jubilee clip isn't quite clamping down this very thin rubber. So let's try a little bit of tape around it. But I think that's going to be good enough to dunk each half of it in the water and see what we've got. So I'll strip the fans and the charge cooler radiator off first. Okay, we have some bubbles. Okay, I can see where that's coming from, just there. Tiny little pinhole just there on that weld. Okay, one on the back there as well. Okay, and one tiny one coming from there, thankfully on a place that I should be able to get to with the TIG. Okay, a couple of small leaks to sort out. At least it's not leaking like a sieve. Right, and that is only from the join of the inner tube. Other than that, where it joins the top tank, looks just fine. There are now no leaks on the radiator, finally. So, what a relief. But it's not quite ready to go in. There's still a couple of more things I want to do, which are going to be easier to do with the radiator out than in. The first of which is these mounts for the flip front. I want to stop a little bit of the side-to-side wobble. So what I'm going to do is put a bolt through these existing holes here, through the brackets, and that should stop them just from moving left and right. So definitely need to do that before I put the radiator in, because there's going to be a bottom tank there. I might also have a look at sorting out the first bits of the charge cooler. I've got these pipes in here, so I know roughly what clearance I've got here, and I might get this outlet from the reservoir into the pump, and then the pump coming up this way, just prepped. Those are going to be a bit more difficult to do on the back underneath the car. So let's crack on with those, and then hopefully we can get the radiator in, get it filled up, and think about getting the car down on its wheels to shift it outside. Okay, so that's the lower crossmember in, and these are definitely a lot more secure, so that should stop the flip front wobbling around quite as much. Time will tell whether I regret the decision to put this on first and not slice down here. We shall see the next time I need to take this lower crossmember out. But for the moment, what I'm going to move on to do is mount up the charge cooler pump back down under here and sort out at the very least this hose going down to it and the one coming up to the top. Then let's get the radiator in, charge cooler radiator in, and get all of these radiator hoses hooked up. And then we need to put it down on the floor and move it outside. Okay, so that's the basics of the inlet and outlet from the pump. I still haven't finished off this one yet. I'm not entirely sure whether I'm going to come down, whether I'm going to go straight out and then loop round. I'll have to see exactly where this sits once the radiator's in. But I think that is probably the next thing we can do, is to bring the radiator in. So after lots of crawling around on the floor, I have the feed from the charge cooler expansion tank or charge cooler reservoir into the pump, and that will clear that. Jobs like this, when I had the radiator up in place, it's just so much easier if you can get the car another 2 foot higher in the air. You don't have to crawl on the floor as much. But the next thing I need to figure out is the fan controller for the fans. So usually on the Galant, this is bolted to the back of the radiator and it sits in the airflow coming from the fans. So ideally it needs to have some kind of airflow over it to keep it nice and cool, especially as I am running these fans all the time at a low speed. This is going to be pumping out quite a lot of heat. So I'm going to need to find somewhere that I can get it that's going to be in the airflow. Originally it was over here-ish, I think. So right where this is now, so obviously it can't go back there. And I'm rapidly running out of space. So I shall crawl back under, try to figure out where this is going to go and sort out the wiring from the fans into this. And then maybe we can put the radiator in and see about moving it outside. Ow! Ah, that hurt. Oh, suspension arm. God, it's so difficult to get the right angle on this. So after a couple of failed attempts at positioning the fan controller, I've now finally stumbled upon the location it's going to sit. And that is up here, just below the alternator. It's bolted to the chassis. It's quite easily removable, just 2 bolts when I need to take the engine out. Notice how I said when I need to take the engine out. I've sorted out the wiring on the fans, so that should clip into there quite nicely. And I've then just got to sort out this cable and connector that will run across from the passenger side and clip in and sort out the ground. I don't think I'm going to put the ground over this side. I might run that back over to over here. We shall see when I get to it. But I think that is, for the moment, about all I can do in this area, or need to do in this area, without having to take the radiator out again. So I'm going to try now to put the radiator back in, and hopefully that's the last time it needs to come out for a little while. But as you know, these things don't always go as I think, and it's probably going to have to come out again within the next 5 minutes. but we can hope. So let's get that in and look at the next thing to do to hopefully get this thing outside and get it running and up to temperature. So before I put the top support on for the radiator, I need to sort out the charge cooler hoses. I'm not going to fill the charge cooler system just yet, just in case I do need to take the radiator out for any reason. But I do want to sort out all of this mess of pipework and at least get everything cut to length and in position. You may remember from a few episodes ago I swapped out the fittings on the charge cooler itself for these ones, and I was planning on using some 90-degree fittings, but I then found these banjo style, which means that they will come a lot nicer angle off of the charge cooler rather than the big ones that loop all the way 90 degrees, that loop all the way around before I even get anywhere near the hose. So I'm going to swap these out for these, get this hose up into the charge cooler, back out and to the top of the charge cooler radiator at least, because that goes kind of through that gap down there, and that's going to get blocked in by the cross member. So I'll get that sorted, and then I think there's a couple more things that still need to be done before it can go down on its wheels. So it's a new day, and I'm hoping that today is the day that we can get this outside and off its axle stands finally and get it all up to temperature for the first time in about a year. But there's a couple of things I need to do first. I need to put some oil in the gearbox, refit the prop shaft, put the wheels on, refit the driver's seat, fill it up with some fuel and add the config to the ECU for the new injectors. So I will crack on and get all of that done, and in a moment when I'm back we should hopefully be ready to stick this outside. So that's all the old oil drained out, the sump plug cleaned up and put back in the gearbox. And usually you'd fill these gearboxes from the side, but I have a very tight tunnel here and I've not got the gear lever in, so I'm going to just fill it through the gear lever hole. And I have here some Amsoil manual transmission gear lube. Over here in the UK we tend to find that the Amsoil does very well for all of the VR4 running gear, and this gearbox was a little bit noisy with the cheap old rubbish oil that was in it, so I'm going to try the Amsoil in it and see if that quietens it down just a fraction, hopefully, to make it a slightly nicer drive. So gearbox takes about 2.4 litres. These are 1 US quart or 946 millilitres, so basically 2.5 of these bottles. So let's get filling once I have put the prop shaft in, because if I start to fill it now, some of the oil that I put in will just come out of the end of the gearbox onto the floor, and I definitely do not want that. So before I do this, let's go and get that prop shaft bolted up. So the fuel feed that goes under the car and up above the gearbox is hitting on the prop shaft, and there is no room to move it out the way, so I'm going to have to take the engine and gearbox out and redo those fuel lines, which I really do not want to do, but the prop shaft is hitting the fuel rut line. There's nothing I can do about it. The engine and gearbox has got to come out. It's a good job I'm quite practiced at it. So on we go. I'll see you in a moment when it's out. I love redoing jobs multiple times. So let's get under and sort out this fuel line, reroute it so it doesn't come along the tunnel somehow. Don't know if I've got enough hose. I might have to add a join in it, which I really didn't want to do. What a pain. And this whole thing would have been so much easier if I could have had the car another 3 foot up in the air. Oh, to have a lift. Please, I want one. So if you're watching many episodes ago when I ran these fuel lines, you may remember that I was debating putting a bulkhead fitting through this overhang here, and I decided not to do it. Well, I think now is the time to do it, because I've not quite got enough length on the hose to reroute it underneath, but I will have enough length if I put the bulkhead fitting here and then have a small length from here up to the engine. So at least I didn't cut it down shorter and do that the first time, because then I wouldn't have this option now. But I really dislike doing jobs multiple times, as I said. So yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. And I'll be back in a minute. Right, so I've got the bulkhead fittings in here now, and the feed and return are up and joined to the bottom, and they're bolted back down on the place where they were bolted before. So they'll clear the engine and gearbox here, and the rest of it underneath is going to be off to the side. So I think that means I can probably safely get the engine and gearbox back in from outside, get it in. I really can't be bothered to crawl under there and weld up some brackets for the fuel hoses, and as I'm only going to be driving it outside, heat it up, bring it back in, that can wait till another day. So let's get the engine and gearbox back in the hole, everything bolted up, and let's get to the point where we were at about 4 hours ago, which is trying to put some oil in the gearbox. Okay, so engine and gearbox are back in and on all their mounts. I need to sort out the fuel lines again up the top here, and then put back all the radiator, all the cooling system, all the vacuum hoses, everything else. So I will crack on with that, and I'll give you a progress update in a moment. So where was I before I got rudely interrupted by that fuel line? I was going to put some of this Amsoil manual transmission fluid in the gearbox, 2.4 litres, which is basically 2.5 of these bottles. So let's get pouring through the gear stick hole. Yep, half a litre left in the bottle, so that should be 2.4 litres in the gearbox. So the car is basically ready to have its wheels put on and roll it outside, which unfortunately I'm not going to be doing this episode, because having to take that engine and gearbox out again to sort out the fuel lines has used up all of the daylight today, and it's quite late. I need to get this video up to you tomorrow, and I don't really want to be starting up the loud, noisy car this late on a weekday. So that's going to wait until the next free weekend I've got, which means that you'll have to come back next time to see how it goes with all the leak testing. So thank you very much for watching again, and see you next time on Garry's Garage. Bye.